Okay, so I guess it is about time I try to explain what kind of skill cards that I use in Escape for the classes. Um, it's been a while, so bear with me. I might not know everything anymore, but I should have still all the kind of like setups that I usually play with. There's a few classes that I hardly really play. Blademaster is the greatest example for that. That's just like, in general, whether in Horde or in Escape, like the rarest class I ever play. And I guess I suggest you just check out the Relax and Cody. He's probably one of the best, if not the best Blademaster player in general. He can probably explain it way better than I can. And but I will either way, it's just showcase you what I would be using in case I would playing those classes. So let's get it going. So Blademaster, a CQC class, meaning you have to be in close quarter combat in order to be efficient with it, technically at least. There's a few exceptions, but in general, for pretty much almost any hive, this is actually usually the best approach. You just go in there melee-wise, and the cards I use in this case is Thrill of the Hunt for, as usual, the general damage resistance when enemies are bleeding, as well as the forced healing. Then Venom Blade to apply bleeding for the enemies. Since in Horde you get that as a perk, but here in Escape you don't, so you actually have to use the card to apply bleeding. And these kind of two cards like always belong together if you use them. Usually I go with mid-range deflection, venom resistance, and short-range deflection, so the three other resistance cards. Venom resistance, so that you can actually be efficient in the venom as well, and you can basically go in vulnerable mode in case you have some enemies nearby that are bleeding. Since you get the 32% damage resistance while in venom, you get another 32% if you bleed an enemy, which is 64%, and you get another 32% if you're either within 5 meters or 10 meters, depending on which cards you're using. So that's up to 96% damage resistance, so you're basically kind of like almost invulnerable already. It's basically the same thing as Brawler, who was pre-nerf, kind of. And in addition to that, also via the passive, you get a little bit of damage resistance for melee, so you should be invulnerable against melees at least. So that's like the general, just, I guess, standard Blademaster equipment that you can use pretty much in any hive. You can go a bit more risky mode, and you can try to output more damage, in which case you probably want to select Blademaster and or Brawler. But it turns out if you equip Brawler in pretty much every hive, except for a very few exceptions, the Juvies die in a single hit if you equip Brawler, in which case you don't get the bleeding and the forced healing, which is really, really good actually to get yourself back to health, since you usually get hit from a few enemies here and there. And this is basically the main reason you don't want to use Brawler or any additional damage cards in Escape, because usually, unless it's like a Scion Hive like the Lion, or the Juvies just have absurd health like on the Warren, you're better off actually just going with a little less damage, but force yourself to heal a bit better, to have more damage resistance, just to stay alive a bit longer. So that's kind of like the generic approach there. You don't want to go full damage mode, you could, if you want to, but it's generally a better idea that you just focus a bit on damage resistance, and rather just like to sort of keep in mind that you might have to pick up a few teammates here and there, since it's a bit trickier than Horde. So yeah, those are like the main 5 cards. Ambush, in my opinion, is completely useless. It's really rare actually killing enemies from behind, even though if you down them, they always face away and you can kick them, you get that kill from behind, but it's just not really worth it. You're going to do enough damage and you will get your ultimate eventually, and that you can use it multiple times. Blademaster, as told, is good in case you want to really go full damage mode, in case you have like bosses in the hive or something like that, and you want to quickly kill a few enemies. But other than that, it's not really recommended in my opinion. Brutal Claw is good if you have a less melee-focused hive, but you have a claw somewhere on the map. But it generally finds less use, and if so, you just go with another class anyways. Energy Search is pointless, there's no fabricators, there's no energy taps. I don't have to talk about score boost. Nasher Mastery can be useful. Once again, you can just go Infiltrator if you really want to focus on the Nasher. On the flank is similar to like Brawler and Blade Dancer, in my opinion not really worth it. since we have to actually damage the enemy from behind to increase the damage. And in theory, it's only ballistics damage, but I'm pretty sure that applies to melee damage as well if you keep holding a ballistic weapon in your hand. Shock Shield, in my opinion, is useless because you usually get some sort of an invulnerability when you trigger your ultimate already. So in my opinion, Shock Shield is actually one of the most useless cards you can have. I just don't find it really worth it to be the 250 HP stim that you get instantly when triggering. Usually you lose it instantly, or pretty soon-ish, and you have all the healing effects from the other cards that you have already equipped, so you don't really need additional stim. Besides, it's 50% of your max stim that you can hold. 500 HP stim is the maximum that you can have, so in my opinion, really not worth it. Shock Chain can be useful actually, in which case if you really want to use it, I recommend that you either swap out mid-range deflection or short-range deflection. I usually swap out mid-range deflection, since the other 4 cards are actually really useful, and for melee combat you are going to be within 5 meters, in which case mid-range deflection is not really going to take effect that often. So if you want to use Shock Chain, replace mid-range deflection with it. It can be good if you have flying enemies and you have another grounded enemies nearby that you can use Shock Chain to hit the flying enemies, or you just have plenty of enemies trying to storm you, in which case Shock Chain is going to come in handy. Nimble is actually not really that useful in Escape, because usually you're fast enough, you don't need to be any faster. Deep Pockets is pointless, Banana Clip is pointless, Brawler I've explained just before, and Efficient Executioner is pointless since you're actually going to kill them. You don't want to execute them because it just takes so long, because you actually have to do the actual execution. Meat Shield's not going to do it. You have to do the actual execution, therefore it's going to be pointless. So that's for it for the Blademaster. As told, I'm not an expert here, it's just what I would be going if I play Blademaster, which I basically don't do anymore since it's not my class. But yeah. Going now to Demolitionist, probably the hardest class to really play in Escape, since it really is completely focused on explosives. But this kind of funny setup that I have here, which includes the Lancer Shield Master, is actually an all-around setup that you can use pretty much anywhere. The reason being, usually there's like a few grenades, or a drop shot, or maybe one boom shot, or just one explosive weapon nearby. You probably don't get max ammo out of it, but if you kill them with some bleeding, so combined with Razor Hail, or just insta-kill them with the explosive weapon, you get additional damage for the ballistics. And there's more ballistics weapons on the maps than explosives usually. Which means you can kind of like combine it a little bit. So for instance, you can just boom an enemy, or multiple enemies, and then you can just switch over to, I don't know, a Hammer Burst, Enforcer, whatever, and it's going to do a lot of damage. And speaking about the Enforcer, I guess I should explain that Lancer Shield Master is a broken card. It says that it only reduces the recoil for Lancer Shields. However, it actually reduces the recoil for every single weapon, which makes this weapon actually a pretty good weapon. This card actually a pretty good card, since for the Enforcer you basically will have no recoil, and it applies to any other weapon as well. So you basically have no recoil on any single weapon. So this card is a good all-rounder card, as long as it remains broken, of course. You never know when they're gonna fix it. Which just generally helps to like actually kill enemies, I guess. If there's like it's a sniper map or something, then you obviously don't need the card. But for pretty much any other map, it's a pretty comfortable card I can use. Concussive Strike is very helpful, since it keeps them stunned for a very long time. I used it in my melee brawl solo, and I can confirm this card is absolutely massive, just because the range of enemies it can affect, and just because they're stunned for, it feels like an endless amount of time. 11 seconds is really long, so Concussive Strike is actually going to come in real handy. And eventually, of course, Officer's Prerogative, so that your ultimate is actually going to deal enough damage. But that's kind of like the general setup that you can use. You can swap out any of these cards. Usually it's going to be Lancer Shield Mastery, in case you have a Boom Shot or a Lancer Shield on the map, with obviously custom Boom Shot or custom Lancer Shield. Or if you really want to, you can also go for Grenade Satchel, because Grenade Satchel doesn't only increase the frag grenade capacity, it increases the grenade capacity in general, which means you can also have more flashbangs, which then again means, since you're the explosive guy, you're probably gonna pick up all the explosive boxes, and explosive boxes always grant one grenade to your inventory, so Grenade Satchel is also a pretty handy card. Gambit's pointless. Explosive Support is alright-ish, but it's not gonna see much use in Escape. It's way better off in Horde, so I recommend not using it. Confirmed Kill is pretty much pointless unless you kinda like go for the combo wombo with interrogation card from Tactician, which once again has to be paired with Spoiler Support. But it turns out there's a bit of a limit as well on how many enemies your artillery can drop, which is 15. So just keep that in mind. But in general, these two cards are like never really that useful in escape runs. Good Kill, I completely forgot again about this card. As long as you're playing with teammates, this card in escape is completely overkill, since it's way better than Tactician's Resupply. This basically drops ammo pouches on level 6, which are like the middle-sized ammo boxes. And they don't behave the same way as the usual ammo boxes that you find within the Hive. So for instance, if Ammo Starvation is on, Good Kill ammo pouches completely override Ammo Starvation and you still get the regular amount of ammo. On top of that, they even give you more ammo than the regular ammo pouches. In fact, even more than ammo boxes. So for instance, with an ammo box in Escape, you get, I believe it is 2 longshot bullets or 3. But with an ammo pouch, you get 4 occasionally. I think it's not always 4. I think it's kind of like random-ish in a way. But you get more, or you can get more. It was always 3 for me, sometimes even 4. So this card is completely overkill. And I mean, it's literally just killing enemies. It doesn't even matter whether you're using explosives. It's really just killing enemies. And it says kills 5 meters from allies. As far as I know, it's like as long as the allies are within 5 meters of you, and then you kill an enemy, that's when an ammo pouch is gonna drop, because it was pretty buggy, but I think it pretty much works that way. And Good Kill is usually a good replacement for Concussive Strike, Lance and Shield Mastery, or Officer's Prerogative, one of the 3. But yeah, a very helpful card. He's actually a better resupplier than Tactician in my opinion. Inspired, useless, unless you have a veteran, in which case it's still useless since you have to be close to it. And like the 32% damage resistance is not really going to help you in a master run. And Launcher Mastery, I mean, you train the weapons eventually and you will get used to it. So with the shorter-ish reload bar, so you really don't need that card either. And Gambit, you don't need that either, because wherever you plant the grenade, it's probably going to be in the back from where you came from, so it's going to be pointless to be able to plant even more than just 2 grenades on the ground. So I believe that covers it on Demolitionists. A pretty underrated class in my opinion in Escape, just because of Good Kill. Can be actually really helpful, especially to just override the Ammo Starvation modifier. Infiltrator, probably one of the strongest classes in Escape. Exact same setup as in Horde. So Blood's Resonance, Stim Batteries, Enhanced Stim, Laceration, the Reaper. I guess I really don't have to explain why, since that's just generally the strongest setup that you can have. Sometimes Chain Spew is useful in a way, but that basically kind of like means you have to get rid of either Stim Batteries or Enhanced Stim, some card like that. Because Reaper, you get Stim, Enhanced Stim, it increases the resistance while you're stimmed. So yeah, it gets pretty tough pretty quickly, like which card you want to replace. Usually the invisible ultimate is gonna last long enough so that you don't really need Chain. Healing Joint pointless, they're even pointless, that 32% is not gonna matter, you don't need more capacity, it's two more I think, or like 4 more bullets in your mag. You're already doing enough damage, you don't need Custom Nasher, you don't really need to increase the cloak duration usually, in which case if you would probably chain it together with Chain. But in my opinion, as told, not really that useful. Long reach, nope, useless. Overkill stock, as long as you keep firing the overkill in a not rapid fire mode style, so you keep it a little slower. You hold the trigger button down, you should be good to go and don't need it, and you don't need the extended active reload bar. Marksman has a lot of variety. It really depends on the map you're playing, but usually icy precision is going to be something that's going to help as long as there's a marks around on the map. If there's no marks around, it's usually pointless to go icy precision, since the time it takes you to fire another shot with the M-bar or the long shot, usually the enemies are unfrozen again or partially unfrozen again, so it's not really going to be that worth it. But icy precision can be really strong as soon as there is a hunter on the map or you get a hold of a marksman anywhere. Critical parade is actually going to be helpful here, since you actually want to use that ultimate for a longer period of time. Exploit weakness, I guess I don't have to explain. Modified long shot, as long as there's a long shot on the map, of course. And ambush, I don't have to explain either. You can go explosive critical hit if you really want to, but in my opinion, usually the enemies weren't really clustered up too hard. They usually take cover, so I didn't really find it to be that useful. There's a few exceptions in hives where it may be useful, but usually I refrain from using the card. Long shot handling you really don't need in that case. You don't really need more ammo capacity for the M-bar unless you're playing the split. Then you might consider using that. You don't need counter snipe since you go down with one shot anyways. Patience, no, it's like you just kill stuff and you get your ultimate that way. With patience you need to stay on damage for way too long, so it's not really going to be helpful for you unless you're going to plan to do solo run. Modified M-bar makes sense, like on the split for instance, where you only get an M-bar, or any other map that features M-bars, you can decide to go on M-bar mode to do a little bit more damage than usual. Master Marksman you don't need, as long as you keep playing you get eventually used to the reload bars, and Steady Hand you don't need either, as long as you stay a little bit on the back, don't get shot, you should be fine. So usually like the same 5 cards. Modified long shot is going to be replaced with, I don't know, explosive critical hit or M-bar, modified M-bar, one of the two usually. Nomad. I'm a terrible Nomad player as well. It's not a class that I'm using usually. There's a bunch of different ways you can play it. Basically sort of ish identical to how you would play it in Horde. You can go sort of hybrid style-ish. Usually it makes sense that you go execution mode, since with execution shield during the execution you're invulnerable. Plus, if you do use it, it fears the enemies away, which gives you more time to deal with them. You do double damage on them as usual and stuff like that. Since you get stim, armored shot always makes sense, since you're actually gonna do blade damage not only with ballistics, but unless they fix it again. I don't remember, honestly. Maybe it's still broken, maybe not. But usually it's just generally a good idea to use armored shot to just apply bleeding damage with your ballistic weapons as long as you're stimmed, which is really, really easy to get a hand of in Escape, since the enemies are not that powerful as in Horde. So this kind of like triple combo here is really good. And since you're going to go in close range, Nomad armor makes sense to have a little bit more damage resistance, and Menace makes sense so that you get your ultimate, like the actual ultimate back frequently. So you can kind of like combo enemies with phase. So whenever you execute an enemy, within 10 meters the enemies run away from you. If it kind of like doesn't quite work out, you just trigger the ultimate, and with Menace you do like, I don't know, what is it, 3 executions or something, or 4, and you already have your ultimate back. Considering it's like not really worth executing enemies, if there's like too many flusher enemies, or just science again, or bosses, then you can of course get rid of execution shield, phase, and or Nomad armor, as well as Menace, and replace those 4 cards with, for instance, Intimidation, Consecutive Shot, Marksman Mastery. You can go Lifeline if you really want to. Usually Stim might be provided from somebody else, and Acceleration you actually don't need. Of course, Marksman Mastery depends on whether there's a Marks around. Power Spin is pointless, so Acceleration you usually don't need. You're going to be within 15 meters pretty much every time. 15 meters is a long range, so I recommend not using Acceleration. Fearsome Aura, in my opinion, was always useless. I really didn't like Fearsome Aura. The 6 meters just didn't really make too much of a difference. You're kind of rarely going to be above an enemy. It's usually the other way around, or you're going to be on even ground, so rain down's not really going to be helpful either. Nasher is not the card you use for a Nomad usually. If so as well, once again, just go Infiltrator. However, concussive rounds can come in handy to stun the drones or whatever and just insta-execute them immediately. You can, in theory, stack concussive rounds with the execution build. You can, for instance, also refrain from an armor shot if you would not just really go execution style, or you can just risk it a bit more, get rid of the damage resistance from Nomad armor and instead go concussive rounds. Concussive rounds in general, just in Escape, is a really, really good card. So it's always worth considering whether you might be having a lot of drones and stuff to use concussive rounds with you. Precision resistance useless as usual, just like with Marksman, and Terror is, in my opinion, also a bit useless since it only affects the ultimate. I should mention Fearsome Aura and Terror only affect the ultimate, so when you pair that, for instance, with an execution from face, it doesn't apply to that. So it only works with the ultimate, so just keep that in mind. But once again, so considering you kind of like don't want to go execution style, but more like ranged style, you can basically get rid of these 4 cards and then instead use Intimidation, Consecutive Shot, and then you can, depending on whether you have a Marksaw, kinda sort of depends a little bit what you want to do. You can go Lifeline to regain Stim, and Concussive Rounds, for instance, kind of like a default sniperish style setup. And if there's a Marksaw, you can go Marksman Mastery to extend it even further. It's pretty hard to stack a Nomad build together that kind of like is perfect for everything, since the escape hives are different and they probably demand a different kind of setup every time you play Nomad. So pretty versatile class, just like in Horde. It really depends on your playstyle, it depends on the hive, it depends on your teammates, and that's basically how you want to choose your card setup there. Going down to the tank classes, we have once again Anchor, who is absolutely ridiculous and it's gonna shred completely everything. Bullet Chain, Adrenaline Chunky, and Bloody Shot together, they're just absolutely melting everything in any hive. It really doesn't matter which hive you play, it just works. And Bolt-Hook Bandolier, since you're going to be a little bit low on ammo usually in Escape, so it kind of like helps to have Bolt-Hook Bandolier with you, and Barrier Feedback to extend the duration for a little bit. You can get rid of it if you want and instead use Barrier Battery, just have that one-time extended duration, but I preferably go with Barrier Feedback since that kind of like bases it on how many enemies there are and kind of extends the ultimate duration based on how many enemies there are. While Barrier Battery, like just really everywhere, just extends it by 60% every time. So in my opinion, Barrier Feedback is a little bit better. Harness Energy, I mean, of course it can be useful. You can, for instance, get rid of Adrenaline Chunky if you're not really gonna, if you already know you're not really gonna play in Venom too much, then you can get rid of the damage card Adrenaline Chunky and replace it for Harness Energy, for instance. You don't need Venom Recharge because your ultimate's gonna come back so ridiculously quickly that this is a waste of a card. You don't need Dodge. This is, once again, Precision Rifle, Damage Resistance. These cards are completely pointless. You don't need to taunt your enemies. They're going to shoot at you anyways. Melee damage is not really helpful in Escape too much. You're better off just focusing on the Bolt-Hook or otherwise just melee with your weapon or with your knife instead of using the barrier for melee damage. So Lethal Barrier is going to be useless as well. Well, I mean, if you really have that stupid teammates, then you might just consider I guess changing the team if they keep shooting you. You really don't need heads up. Just tell your teammates to be more careful, that's all. You don't need Crazy Top usually, they're not that as strong as in Horde. You also don't really need to increase barrier size, even though your friends could benefit from it. I just personally don't really find it useless, just find it useful. Just stand still. If you found your spot, stand still, have your teammates go like behind you and just shoot at the right over your shoulder or at the left over your shoulder and they're good to go for that additional 50% damage. So barrier boost not useful in my opinion. Venom resistance you don't really need either. If you're gonna clearing out wave after wave here, then it's like You're not really gonna be in Venom either. And usually, if so, then you're not in thick Venom that damages you, and you don't really need the additional damage resistance since you have your barrier. The barrier is gonna protect you more than enough. You really don't need the additional damage resistance. I believe that covers Anchor. Then we have Brawler. Brawler, this is like the default setup that I usually go for pretty much any hive with a few exceptions. All the Glory, Inner Fire, Perk Up, Torch, Tackle, Damage Dash, which is kind of like the standard tackling build that I have been playing since basically Brawler or Cole back then came out. Since that overall grants you a 75% damage resistance while sprinting, and all the Glory is just completely going to blow up everything. As usual, just have to run in, tackle, jump back, tackle them again, which is usually going to be like the best combo you can use against pretty much any enemy. If you feel like that's not your playstyle, you can of course go ranged build, in which case I have to pretty much get rid of all the cards. You probably want to use still all the Glory since it's going to be useful. And you want to use, let's see, probably Inner Fire, since you're not really gonna play with that. Then you want active burn chance, or maybe Burka up, and you want Pyromanic for the extra burn. So this is like more or less the ranged build that you can use, plus minus, give or take, depends on what exactly that you like. You can swap these, like all the Glory for something else. It kind of depends how the map is. I really just never played that way in Escape. I did in Horde, but not in Escape. But I heard it kind of works out pretty well as well. There's not really gonna be many Scorchers around on many hives. It's really just a few, which makes the Scorcher mastery a bit pointless. And but you can, depending on the hive, I believe really just the Warren where it works, you can technically go killing time as well, which is gonna let you at least like on the bridge part where there's like gonna be a million Jewies, what feels like, there you can at least take out everything at ease, like without any issue at all. You just go killing time, go smashing in there, you just one-shot everything. Which is once again gonna rely on the tackle build, which is basically pretty similar, but you kind of like don't need that. But instead, so you would go with Torch, Tackle, and Damage Dash again, and you basically replace all the Glory, for instance, with Killing Time. It's really just a specific example for the Warren, which is a lot of fun. Yeah, that's kind of like how it's gonna work. I guess for the rest of the cards, Soothing Warmth is really not going to be useful, since as soon as you tackle kill enemies you get stim. Burn in the recharge is pointless, at least if you're not really focusing on this kind of like killing time build-ish in a way. You still have to find a way to burn enemies, and the 6% in my opinion is just not really going to do it. Burn boost in my opinion has always been pointless, since like this extra damage of the melee killing and burning enemies, like you have to combine so many things together that this card's gonna be useful, that I just generally find it a waste of a card. Fuel tanks is depending on the Scorcher, and even then is useless. Play with fire if taking a look at it already. Pyromanic as well. Scorch Mastery once again depends on the Scorcher. Defensive tackle is pointless, since you get enough stim from a single kill. Glow and slow, in my opinion, in Escape is useless, since you don't really need to slow the enemies down. They're usually hiding somewhere anyways. Haymaker is pointless, since you can just insta-execute them, you don't need the additional damage. So as soon as you use your punch, you can just execute them anyways. The Steam Engine is useless, since it doesn't really matter too much that you burn enemies around you, and Trashball Pro is only really kind of useful on the line against Science, if you go tackle build, but other than that, it's in my opinion not really that useful. So I guess that covers Brawler. Down to Gunner. Gunner kind of like depends on the hive as well again, but usually the cards you can go for is Reflex Shredder, Bait Armor, and usually there's a heavy weapon around, in which case you can go heavy capacity combined with heavy charger as well. And Team Resist is actually always going to be a useful card, So for instance, if there's no torpo around, you just go team resist, like that. Since whenever you trigger the ultimate, your teammates are just going to be basically invulnerable for 6 seconds. So in my opinion, team resist is always a useful card to use in like worst case scenarios and stuff like that. I guess Rated Edge explains itself. Torpo around, use it, otherwise nope. Mulcher Mastery, mulch around, use it, otherwise nope. The ultimate battery I feel like you don't really need. Usually you get back your ultimate soon enough, or you just don't use your ultimate. Concussive explosives, I feel like it's not really worth it to stun the enemies with it, since you need to be relatively close, and if so you can just go melee combo on them, since usually drones and stuff like that you're gonna stun. And the science, there's usually other classes around, or you have your turbo or your heavy weapon that you can deal with them. So in escape specifically, I find concussive explosives not to be that useful enough. Grace period, I mean, sure, if you want to have an additional survivability chance and when people revive you that you stay immune for a short period, then you can go for it, but usually it's really not necessary to use it. You don't really have to use heavy deflect unless you're gonna go with a sort of speedrun strategy on last stand together with pilot, but other than that you really don't need heavy deflect. Freeze resist is actually going to be very useful on heists like Ice Queen, since the snipers are actually no longer going to one-shot you with that. You don't even need any damage resistance, you really just need the freeze resistance, and this one is going to keep you to stay alive and not freeze to death instantly from the snipers. In fact, you're not even going to go down. Flash freeze usually is useless, since the cryo cannon is not really a weapon that's used that often in escape, since you have usually other ways to deal with the enemies. Blast shield, the 32% are not going to cut it against explosives, so it's useless. Soul survivor is really just when you're doing solo runs, in which case it's going to help, otherwise nope. Grub magnet you don't need, they're going to be focused by enemies anyways. Heavy shell you can consider equipping if you really want to, just consider that it doesn't apply bleed damage. Really only useful against like sentinels and that kind of stuff. But in my opinion was usually a waste of cards. There were usually other better cards around. Phoenix armor, I mean you can just go Grey Spirit already if you use Phoenix armor, although when you start the hive you actually also get Stim, which is a bit strange, but apparently that's a thing. But in my opinion, not really a useful card either. Practice every day is sort of broken anyways, because as far as I know you don't get any active bullets, you just get regular bullets. So practice every day is pointless. And tank synergy, once again, if you're playing with a pilot and go speedrun style, then it's useful, otherwise it's not really useful. So I believe that covers Gunner, I guess. Pilot is usually with this build like the most solid, I guess. So Silverback, Salvo, Hammer, Bleeding Mulcher, Cold Finisher, Negative Armor. Obviously there's not always going to be a drop shot around, so you may consider swapping out the Hammer with, I don't know, really, something like, I don't know, Healing Explosives maybe, or Rear Armor, I guess. Since pretty much any other Silverback weapon is pointless, the Ice Cannon is pointless, the Boss Kill is pointless, even if it does exploding stuff. Explosive munitions are pointless, the healing munitions are pointless. It's really just, eventually I guess it comes down to either use explosive healing explosives or rear armor. I guess rear armor is better since it apparently also works in Venom, or Thick Venom, in which case you'll have a little bit more health in it. Or you can theoretically even consider using Enforcer Expert, since there's a bunch of Enforcers around. So it actually helps you deal a lot more damage than usual. But pretty much any other cards, not really that useful. Neither the Healing Tri-Shot nor the Silverback Scorcher. The Wingman can be useful if you're doing solo runs again. Usually with 2 players it's not worth it, in my opinion. Initiator, the taunting cards are just pointless. Deep Pockets is pointless. You don't need more ammo in your pistols. And I mean in Escape you cannot even have another pistol than the Talon. so you don't need more ammo on your Talon. And the other cards I basically already explained that they're kind of useless. So usually swap out the hammer with either rear armor, Enforcer Expert, or healing explosives. The other cards keep them as usual. Then we have Veteran. That's kind of like what I usually use with Veteran. Since I'm just going completely damage mode. We can probably consider doing something else. Flankham is like a wild card that you can use for something else. But you really just want to focus on outputting as much damage as you can. And Last Ditch in this case is actually really going to be helpful since you're probably going to get hit a lot of times. And you can even force your additional damage by just going into the Venom. So it's actually really handy to use Last Ditch here, since you're going to do the additional damage with pretty much any weapon. Now if you're going to flank them as well, it's another 150% on top. And if you do a headshot, it's another 60% damage. And that's all without the ultimate. And I mean, with the ultimate, you're basically just going to go haywire. And you basically kind of ish want to stay alive, so that's why I keep Band of Brothers equipped. You're never really going to reach the 110% additional stim capacity, which is 5,000, it's not 5,000, 1,050 stim, I believe. You're kind of like never really going to reach that. So, in my opinion, not really that useful of a card. Considering there is a Retro Lancer or a Lancer nearby, you can use Brutal Efficiency. You can even use it if you really just want to go completely ultimate style, even if there's no executionable weapon around, so basically just standard executions, since you're going to stay invulnerable due to your passive. But I just figured you're just better off shooting weapons in general. Even just like in Horde, brutal efficiency is, in my opinion, not really going to be that useful. So you're better off just going damage mode and get your ultimate that way. The extended rifle mag is actually helpful in a sense of that you pick additional ammo when you pick up ammo boxes. You don't get any more max ammo, but the ammo pouches or the ammo boxes and all that stuff that you pick up, you actually get a bit more than usual. You get basically twice as much than usual out of it, at least for the assault rifles. So can be considered on hives where ammo starvation is a thing, but usually not quite useful enough. With once again an explosive resistance card, it's pointless. Dug-in, in my opinion, is not really going to be useful the same way as it is in Horde, since you're not that extremely vulnerable and you actually want to get hit with Last Ditch to output a bit more damage. So Dug-in is counterproductive in this sense, and I recommend to actually not use it. But you can go custom Lancer, for instance, if you already know there's a Lancer type somewhere around, even the Lancer GL. That just swap out Flankham, for instance, and go with the custom Lancer to output a bit generally more damage. Friendly fire is going to be useless, honestly. It's usually enough range where your teammates can sit nearby. And the reduced recoil you usually really don't need. It's not like that you're fighting enemies on a huge range. So the Lancer stocks not really going to help you that much either. That covers the tank classes. So let's go down to the support classes. Combat Medic, kind of like the same way it works as in Horde, I guess. Pretty much the same setup. If you want to, since the enemies are way less spongy, instead of overdoing it, you can go Intervention and basically try to heal your teammates by just killing enemies. It works, sort of, but I usually tend to stay with overdoing it, since this basically makes you invulnerable whenever you get up, and your teammates additionally also get the 32% damage resistance, which is generally always a bit nice. Or as usual, you can go get up if you have an Infiltrator, for instance. But generally I stick to overdoing it, dodge, helpful headshots, custom Lancer, and a perfect condition, which are like 3 damage resistance cards. Or 2 actually, sorry, 2. Yeah, technically 3 if overdoing it. The card that always applies stim is always going to be helpful. And Well, considering that it wouldn't be any type of Lancer in the map, you can of course swap out custom Lancer, for instance, with Intervention, or in fact even modified Snub. The Snub is not to be underrated, it's actually pretty good. But usually that's kind of like your general setup that you want to go with. I personally didn't find it useful enough to go suppressive recharge to get your ultimate back quicker. That's more of a thing that you can consider in Horde, but even there it's not really that useful. I just generally don't feel like the frag grenade is something that should be in the combat medic's hand. It should be in someone else's hand. Well, technically it's not frag grenades only, it's also flame grenades and theoretically even shock grenades if you manage to kill enemies with shock grenades. But usually it's like a one-time thing where you have to use your ultimate and then you usually set again due to, for instance, as told, overdoing it or get up. And wildcard style, you still could have intervention to get your teammates up since it's 20 meters, and 20 meters is a lot in escape. So you can basically sort of like revive them across, I don't know how many tiles it is, probably like 5 tiles or something, 4 tiles. So yeah, it's quite a lot. Team repair pointless, grenade pouch you can consider if there's a bunch of ammo boxes where you can grenades from, or just generally a bunch of flashbangs around. Healing bounties, in my opinion, not useful enough. And Razor's Edge is used less since usually you're going to be above 50% health. So yeah, I guess that explains it a bit for Combat Medic. It's more like a supportive class if you feel like you need a bit more help in getting back up to have your stronger classes steal more shit. But yeah, if you feel like leveling up Combat Medic, I would recommend this style. Mechanic. I guess here comes the interesting ones. Basically, it's an engineer class, and the passive is usually useless since there's not many maps of weapon lockers. But what you should consider is that the turret or the ultimate itself is a fortification. So it only makes sense to bring bleeding or the shredder rounds that have bleeding damage for the turret. And you can even go overload, even if it only applies to your turret, but it does apply to your turret. And its turret is going to be, well, 40% stronger, which is quite a lot in this game. So it's going to be an actually really powerful turret, as long as it stays over 50% health, which is actually usually the case since you don't really have boomshot signs. You have dropshot signs, of course, and you have salvo signs, of course, but they're usually far away enough that they don't really hit you, and you're usually good to go. A personal defense is like the Tactician's discipline card, and the fun fact here is, even if it only works on the Enforcer, in Escape there's usually an Enforcer around in any map, except for a few exceptions. You can stack that together with custom robotics and robotic porting, in which case, well, robotic porting even and custom robotics even applies to anything else, but especially the Enforcer itself, I can't remember how much damage it does. I believe 600 or even more than 600 per bullet, and you know how fast that gun can fire. So that's gonna be quite a ton of damage, especially against boss style enemies or signs. I'm pretty sure you can wreck one sign with one clip of the Enforcer if you stand next to it. So that's kind of like how strong the Enforcer is actually going to be. It's a really powerful and really underrated weapon, especially in Escape. In the hands of the Tactician, the hands of the Mechanic, probably the strongest weapon you can go for. And combined, of course, with overkills and the other stuff, or like M-bars and that kind of weapons. And they're actually really going to feel the robotic porting cards. Really, actually one of the most helpful cards in the hands of a Mechanic. And fun fact, you actually don't really have many more cards to choose from. Healing Repair is useless, Best Friends is useless, Efficient Fabrication is useless, Long Range Resistance is useless, Efficient Sentry is useless. Armor Plating is pretty much useless. If you want to have your turret survive for a bit longer, you're better off just going Reinforced Fabrication instead, since that one only applies for as long as the turret is above 50% health, while reinforced fabrication makes your turret basically invulnerable. Ingenuity is useless, flow is useless, overclock blocker is useless, rootcut is useless. So the only real actual wild card that you have is reinforced fabrication. But then again, what do you want to replace? There's pretty much nothing you want to replace. This is kind of like the go-to setup with mechanic. And trust me, play this setup on the malfunction and they're gonna have a lot of fun with it. It's really, actually, mechanic's really an underrated class. Not even there, even on the splits or maps like that. It's really cool to play the mechanic in this game, which is generally recommend that you play. Robotics Expert is sort of similar-ish. This is my setup that I used for, I believe this was the Hunters. Well, you want to use the Bloody Deer one, since it's like probably your strongest inventory ultimate that you can have there. You usually want to use experimental weapons, since you're going to deal much damage, more damage eventually. As long as they're like below the health, it's still going to help you, especially if you use an Enforcer, in which case we have once again Enforcer supporting that reduces the recoil of the Enforcer. So these two cards stack really well together, because once again there's a bunch of Enforcers on the map, or on any hive, so keep that in mind, it's going to be actually helping you. And considering there is a precision weapon around, you probably want to use Bloody Support, since you're not always going to use your DR1 everywhere. And the melee resistance is going to help you in the sense of if there's a bunch of Jewies around, or even rejects around, since it will prevent you from getting killed too quickly. But you can replace this with some other cards, of course, as well as the Enforce supporting as well, or even a Bloody Support card, depending on the map, of course. But there's not too many cards to choose from. Global Overclock, useless. Homebody, useless. I mean, okay, technically it increases... The global overclock technically increases the recharge rate of the lockers where it has lockers, like Last Stand. But there's just way better strategies than to hang at lockers and wait for your heavy weapon or whatever you put in there to be reloaded. So it's usually useless. Homebody, as told, is useless. Precision repairs is useless. Party gift is useless. Trust me, I've tried it plenty of times. It's useless. You're either going to kill yourself with that, or the sign is going to withstand it anyways. The 100% increased damage when tagging enemies is not going to cut it. And you're very, very vulnerable. You're not a CQC class, so the tagging enemies with grenade thing is just pointless. Don't even try it. Nurse Steel is useless. Explosive kill shot, well, you can go for it, but the additional 55% damage for surrounding enemies is not quite going to cut it, in my opinion. So, personally, not really a card that I would use, but... if you feel like this could be a useful card for certain highs, feel free to go for it. Combat Engineer, useless. Global Sentry upgrade, useless. Heavy Resistance, usually useless. Unless you get like Mulcher Signs, a bunch of Mulcher Signs, then it maybe helps you to go not go instantly down, but other than that it's pretty much useless. I recommend just going with the melee resistance. And Inspired Sniping, in my opinion, is also useless. It's not... the 1.6 seconds is that low that it's not really going to help you much recharging the ultimate quicker, even if you have... right, so it doesn't even work for the Marks, so never mind, it only works for the Longshot and the M-Bar, so... it's, in my opinion, really not gonna cut it, the Inspired Sniping. So, in other words, this is kind of like your go-to setup that you usually go for. Then we go with Tactician. That is probably one of the strongest classes that you can use in this game, since it's completely versatile and can be used on any hive, if I'm not mistaken. And it's going to be strong regardless of the hive. Just really short, interrogation is only really going to be useful if you have a Demolitionist on your team, and also only if there's sections like on the end where there's like 1 million enemies in the hive, where you can mark them all and then you can just have Demolitionist drop his ultimate down. That's pretty much the only use where interrogation in an escape hive is going to be useful. Other than that, I recommend to always bring in Disciplined. Regardless of the map, just always bring in Disciplined. There's always at least one weapon around that is going to increase your ballistic weapons. Once again, it's an additional 60% per hit up to 200% per hit, instead of what is described here, 6% up to 100%. So it's going to be quite a difference. Shredder also obviously makes sense as soon as there's explosives around, like grenades and stuff. Recharge Bounty just generally makes sense to help your teammates recharge their ultimate, and you yourself to recharge the ultimate, since you're the one guy who's going to resupply stuff. Venom Explosive resupply makes sense. Once again, obviously if there's explosives around, just keep in mind to use your ultimate within the Venom, or like the not the thick Venom, but like the Ash. And Grenade Pouch I usually found to be useful in most of the hives, since there's, once again, you're the explosive guy usually. You pick up the explosive pouches and you always get, or explosive boxes, and you always get the get one grenade for each box, which means you're gonna have a bunch of grenades which you can potentially even trade with your teammates. So Grenade Pouch is usually pretty much in any hive a useful card to go with. Cooperation, the 30% extra damage for marked targets, like not really that useful in my opinion. The resupply healing module is not really gonna cut it in Escape. It's good in Horde, but in Escape it's not quite that useful, I guess, since the enemies are usually not that super strong. Battle Hardened, once again, we have an explosive resistance card, which is useless. You already have Recharge Bounty, so you don't need Venom Boost unless you kind of like really want to go haywire with your ultimate. You can consider pairing those together, which means you get 60 seconds for each kill as long as you're in the Venom. The increased resupply radius is not really useful, since there's an emote that you can spam if you want your teammates to use your resupply, or just spam your resupply and they'll get to you eventually, so the amplifier is not really going to help. Interrogation I already explained. The resupply duration is really not needed, since you're going to be able to get your ultimate back quick enough with a Recharge Bounty. The resupply speed loader is once again more like a Horde card. In my opinion, not really useful enough in Escape, since you're usually good enough killing the enemies. Custom Snap you can go for if there's like not really that many weapons to choose from. Since, don't forget, it pairs with Discipline, so it's going to do a lot of damage. I believe it's like up to 1500 damage per shot, if I'm not mistaken. Eagle Eyes is... I mean, if so, just go Interrogation. Situational awareness, as far as I know, is pretty broken. Doesn't quite work as expected. And once again, just go Interrogation. Modified Hammer Burst. Pretty similar to Custom Snap. If you know if there's a Hammer Burst around, you can go for this. Once again, it pairs with Discipline, so it can be a pretty strong Hammer Burst. And Huddle Up you usually don't need, since it's gonna resupply enough ammo. Unless it's like a map with snipers only, like Ice Queen, where it can come in handy. Or Lethal Engagements, which is also a sniper map where it can come in handy, as long as you're, of course, multiple people. But then, once again, you're probably better off just using resupply duration instead of Huddle Up. So yeah, it's kind of like a versatile class in a way, but generally this is like the go-to setup that you can just use for pretty much any hive, as long as there's explosives around. And otherwise just consider replacing Shredder and Venom Explosive Resupply for anything else. But yeah, that's kind of like the class setup that I usually use. Architect is a lot of fun in Escape. Since Deception is gonna give you the additional 200% damage, Architect is a really good sniper. Pair that with Hologramic Stand, and your hologram is gonna stay there for forever. And the enemies are... It feels like in Escape more attached to the decoys or your hologram, and pair that with hologram in Lifetime, and you're gonna have a good time, trust me. It's actually really cool. And I mean, Deception itself, you don't necessarily even have to use a hologram. You can use your teammates to distract the enemies and then shoot them from the side. So Deception just generally is a really, really cool card, especially if you pair it with sniper weapons. But it also works with other ballistic weapons, of course. For instance, even on the Matriarch. So you can use something else on the Matriarch, like, I don't know, if there's overkills or Nashers or anything, and it's gonna do quite a lot of damage. So Deception, pretty strong card. Architect in general, just a pretty underrated class. I guess generally just the cards are obvious, since the other cards make no sense at all, since they're all fortification based, so that's your only setup that you can go for, really. And but yeah, it's kind of like a lot of fun to play with Architect. Protector is kind of like similar to Blademaster, where you kind of like want to not use Big Knife, which is going to increase your melee damage. And other than that, kind of like works exactly the same way as Blademaster. You just go in there, you smash enemies, use your drop shield to get close to enemies or protect yourself from being shot from other enemies, which is kind of like gonna come in handy. And the Nasher mod, in case you get a hold of an Asher, it's actually not too bad to have it. It's gonna output quite some damage. But I guess other than that, not really too much to explain from Protector. Once again, you can use Big Knife, if, for instance, on the line where you have to trust Science, or on Ice Queen if you really want to just get rid of the Matriarch quickly. Slugger, not many cards to choose from either. I guess you just stick to these 5 since you don't really need to have additional grenades planted anywhere. So it's kind of similar to like Demolitionist, for instance, who could also plant more. So just these kind of like cards. Don't forget that your shotguns are gonna stun enemies, which is really gonna come in handy for escape. So you can just stun them, meat shield them, and they're already done. And with grenade proficiency, don't forget that not only the frag grenades are doing more damage, but also the flame grenades and the shock grenades are doing more damage, so keep that in mind. Power shots, I guess, don't really have to explain that. It's just generally more damage. Grenade capacity, once again, the usual explanation. More flashbangs is always good, more frag grenades is always good. And tough skin, Assault, you don't really have much other cards to choose from. Lethal preparation's just not gonna cut it. And you can use your ultimate very well to stun enemies. So keep that in mind. You might want to have a Lancer, Hammerburst, Enforcer, something like that with you to just keep stunning enemies with heavy hitter. So is your ultimate. But I guess other than that, it really doesn't require any more explanation. Then we have Striker, once again a fairly similar class to Blademaster. Blunt Instrument obviously only makes sense if you have a mace or a pipe. A pipe is considered a mace. Just keep that in mind. So if you play melee brawl, you might consider bringing in blunt instruments, since your pipes are also going to do bleeding damage. But other than that, I guess pretty straightforward. Don't forget First Strike, which is going to affect your longshot, for instance, which is going to do 15,000 damage instead of just 7,500. Generally, your ultimate is, for instance, useful on a high flight gatekeepers, where you can get a Snatcher, where you can just completely stun lock the Snatcher and you can't do anything anymore. But other than that, really not too much to explain about Striker. As told, it's pretty similar to how Blademaster works. So I kept it a little shorter this time, since I already explained like how the classes in generally work in the Horde setup. But that's kind of like the setups that I used or use, whatever, which turned out for me to be just generally helpful, and I hope it will turn out for you to be generally helpful. As usual, different playstyles for different players. Feel free to swap around the cards, feel free to test something that I might have missed. Maybe you find something a bit more powerful than I am using. Feel free to go for it, I'm not going to stop you. This is just what I have been using, what I have been successful with, and with that, I guess I'm gonna head out. Thanks for watching and see you around.